What if I told you that the quietest prayers you whisper while lying in bed may be the loudest in heaven? Not because of where your body rests, but because of what your soul finally dares to reveal when the world grows silent. You see, we often imagine prayer as something upright, structured, almost ceremonial. Knees bent, hands folded, eyes closed in deliberate reverence. And yet, the greater truth, both unsettling and deeply comforting, is this: God has never been impressed by posture. He has always been moved by honesty. Now consider this. When you lie in bed, stripped of the day's noise, your defenses begin to fall. The roles you play dissolve, the masks slip away. And in that fragile stillness, something remarkable occurs. You become real. Prayer has never been a matter of physical arrangement, as though the eternal were persuaded by angles of the body or positions of the limbs. One may kneel with great ceremony and yet remain inwardly distant, while another, lying quietly in bed, scarcely able to lift their head, may speak with a depth that reaches far beyond rehearsed devotion. The essential truth is that God listens first to the movement of the heart, not the posture of the frame. The body can be trained to appear reverent, but the heart cannot be disguised for long, especially in stillness. When you lie down, something subtle occurs. The outward effort ceases. There is no stage upon which to perform, no visible sign to uphold. In that position, you are relieved of the burden of appearing devout and are instead confronted with the necessity of being sincere. The thoughts that surface are often unpolished, even inconvenient, yet they are precisely the material of real prayer. For what value is there in words carefully arranged if they conceal rather than reveal? It is not that posture is meaningless, but that it is secondary. It may assist attention, but it cannot replace authenticity. A man stretched out in quiet exhaustion, whispering a few honest words, may be nearer to God than one who speaks fluently while standing tall, yet guarded within. The divine ear is not drawn by eloquence, but by truth, however fragile or incomplete it may appear. When a person lies down at the end of the day, something within them begins to loosen its grip. The carefully maintained composure of daylight hours gives way to a quieter, more unguarded state. It is here, in this inward softening, that the truest thoughts often emerge. One no longer has the same strength to maintain pretenses or rehearse polished expressions. The mind drifts toward what genuinely weighs upon it: fears that were suppressed, regrets that were postponed, and longings that were quietly ignored. In such a state, prayer becomes less about what one ought to say and more about what one cannot help but feel. This is why lying in bed can become a place of unusual honesty before God. The absence of distraction exposes the soul to itself. One begins to notice not only the obvious concerns, but also the subtle restlessness that lingers beneath them. Words may come slowly, or not at all, yet even the silence carries meaning. For in that stillness, the heart is no longer performing, it is simply present. There is, however, a certain vulnerability in this. To be unguarded is to face truths one might prefer to avoid. Yet it is precisely this exposure that allows prayer to deepen. What is offered to God in such moments is not a carefully constructed speech, but a genuine reflection of the inner life. And it is this sincerity, however imperfect, that transforms an ordinary moment of rest into something profoundly spiritual. There is a quiet and often overlooked truth running through Scripture: that God does not wait for strength before he draws near, but frequently meets a person in their weakness, their stillness, even their exhaustion. Much of life is spent striving, moving, speaking, doing, but there are moments when all such activity ceases and one is left with nothing but their need. Lying down in bed is one of those moments. The body, having reached its limit, refuses further effort, and the soul is gently forced into a kind of stillness it might otherwise resist. It is in this stillness that something significant occurs. The illusion of self-sufficiency begins to fade. A person becomes aware, perhaps more clearly than at any other time, of how little control they truly possess. The day has ended, unfinished in many ways, and there is no immediate remedy. In such a condition, prayer is no longer an act of presentation, but an act of dependence. One does not come as capable, but as needy. This is why moments of rest can become moments of encounter. The absence of movement does not signify absence of meaning. Rather, it often creates the space in which deeper realities can be recognized. When the noise subsides, the heart becomes more attentive, even if it does not fully understand what it perceives. In that quiet awareness, a person may find that they are not alone in their stillness, but gently accompanied, even in their most unguarded and weary state. Lying down at the end of the day presents a curious crossroads for prayer, for it can just as easily become a place of deep communion as it can slip into a habit of quiet neglect. There is a certain comfort in being still, wrapped in the familiarity of rest, and that comfort can either open the heart or lull it into carelessness. Words spoken in such a state are often softer, less structured, and sometimes incomplete. One begins with intention, yet the mind wanders, attention loosens, and before long, prayer dissolves into half-conscious thought. This does not make the moment meaningless, but it does reveal the delicate nature of attention. Prayer, after all, is not merely the act of speaking, but the act of directing oneself toward God. When that direction fades, even sincere beginnings can lose their depth. It is possible to say many things while meaning very little, simply because the heart has not remained engaged. The ease of lying down can subtly encourage this, inviting a kind of spiritual drowsiness that mimics peace without truly becoming it. And yet, the same setting holds remarkable potential. If one resists the pull of distraction, even gently, and chooses to remain present, the simplicity of the moment can become its strength. With no external effort required, the focus shifts entirely inward. A few honest words, spoken with intention, can carry more weight than many spoken absent-mindedly. The difference lies not in the position of the body, but in whether the heart remains awake within it. To lie down is, whether one realizes it or not, to relinquish a measure of control. The body settles, the hands grow still, and all the outward signs of effort fade into quiet rest. It is a posture that admits limitation without needing to announce it. One cannot lie flat and pretend to be in command of everything. The very position suggests dependence. In this way, prayer offered in such a state often carries an unspoken confession that the burdens of the day cannot be managed indefinitely by one's own strength. There is something deeply significant in this quiet surrender. All day long, a person strives to maintain order, to solve, to fix, to endure. But when the night comes and one lies down, there is an unavoidable recognition that much remains unresolved. Prayer, then, becomes less about presenting solutions and more about releasing what cannot be held any longer. It is not always eloquent. It may be nothing more than a few scattered words, or even a silent yielding of thought. Yet beneath it lies a profound act of trust, the willingness to rest while unanswered questions remain. Such surrender is not defeat, though it may feel like it at first. It is, rather, a turning point where the soul ceases its restless grasping and allows itself to be carried, if only for a moment. In that stillness, prayer becomes less an effort to reach upward and more an openness to receive what one cannot produce by effort alone. It must be said, then, that beyond posture, Beyond words, beyond even the moment itself, there lies the deeper question of what truly shapes a life of prayer. For prayer is not measured in isolated instances, but in the quiet consistency of turning toward God, whether in strength or in weariness. Lying down at night is not merely the end of a day. It is, in a sense, a small rehearsal of surrender, a daily reminder that life is sustained not by constant effort, but by something far greater than ourselves. In these moments, when the body rests and the mind begins to drift, one is presented with a choice so subtle it is often missed: to either slip unconsciously into rest, or to pass, even briefly, through a doorway of awareness. A simple thought directed toward God, a fleeting acknowledgement, a quiet gratitude, these are not grand acts, yet they carry a weight that exceeds their size. They shape the soul. Dire, almost imperceptibly, forming a habit of returning, again and again, to the one who listens. Over time, such moments begin to gather significance. What once felt ordinary becomes quietly sacred. The bed, once merely a place of sleep, becomes a place of encounter, not because anything outward has changed, but because the heart has learned to turn, even in its most unguarded state. And in that repeated turning, a life is gradually reoriented, not by force or spectacle, but by the steady, almost hidden work of attention and trust. And so one begins to see that prayer, even in its simplest form, is not confined to moments of clarity or strength, but often unfolds most truthfully in those spaces where clarity seems dim and strength has all but faded. Lying in bed, with the day behind and the unknown ahead, a person stands, if one may still use that word, at the edge of their own limitations. There is nothing left to arrange, nothing left to prove. What remains is merely the self, unadorned and unguarded. In such a condition, prayer may take on a different character altogether. It is no longer driven by urgency or shaped by careful thought, but emerges quietly, almost like a sigh. One does not strive to reach upward so much as yield inward. The usual sense of distance between oneself and God seems, if only slightly, to lessen, not because of any dramatic feeling, but because there is less resistance, less pretense standing in the way. There are moments, subtle and easily overlooked, when the mind grows still enough to notice something beyond its own noise. Not a voice, not a vision, but a kind of quiet assurance that does not argue or explain, yet remains. It does not remove every question, nor does it solve every burden, but it alters how those burdens are carried. What once felt heavy may not become lighter in substance, yet it is no longer borne alone. Such moments cannot be forced, nor can they be manufactured by effort. They arrive, if they arrive at all, in the gentle space created when one ceases striving and simply remains present. And it is often there, in that unremarkable stillness, that prayer becomes less about speaking and more about being, less about asking and more about quietly receiving. And yet, there is a further mystery to consider, one that quietly challenges our assumptions about what prayer must feel like in order to be real. For many, lying in bed brings not peace, but distraction. Thoughts scatter, attention weakens, and the desire to pray is often met with a kind of inward resistance. One might begin with intention, only to find the mind wandering within moments, drifting between fragments of memory, worry, and imagination. It is tempting in such moments to conclude that nothing meaningful is happening, that prayer, if it cannot be sustained with clarity and focus, must surely lose its value. But this conclusion rests on a misunderstanding. Prayer is not a performance that succeeds only when executed flawlessly. It is a relationship that persists even when our awareness falters. To return, even repeatedly, from distraction, is itself a quiet act of devotion. Each small effort to refocus, each gentle turning back, carries significance. It reveals a willingness, however fragile, to remain oriented toward God, despite the mind's tendency to wander. And perhaps this, more than uninterrupted attention, reflects something deeply genuine about the human condition. We are not creatures of perfect focus, but of continual returning. Lying in bed exposes this reality with unusual clarity. There is no structure to rely upon, no outward discipline to sustain the moment. One is left to practice a softer kind of faithfulness, not marked by intensity, but by persistence. The prayer may feel scattered, incomplete, even interrupted, yet beneath it lies a steady movement of the heart, choosing again and again not to drift too far, but to come back, however quietly, to the one who remains attentive even when we are not. In the end, we are left with something far simpler and far more demanding than we first imagined. Prayer is not measured by whether you stand tall, kneel low, or lie still in the quiet of your bed. It is measured by whether, in that moment, you are truly turned toward God. The body may rest, the mind may wander, the words may falter. But if the heart, even faintly, reaches in honesty, then something real has occurred. To pray while lying down is not a lesser form of devotion, nor is it automatically a deeper one. It is merely a place, a setting in which the truth of your inner life is harder to conceal. There, at the close of the day, stripped of noise and effort, you are invited to bring what is real rather than what is rehearsed. Not perfection, but presence, not eloquence, but sincerity. And perhaps this is the quiet wonder of it all, that God meets a person not at the height of their strength, but often at the edge of their weariness. That even unfinished prayers, spoken in the fading light of consciousness, are not lost. That returning, however weakly, still matters. So whether you find yourself alert or drifting, focused or distracted, strong or exhausted, do not be troubled by the posture of your body. Ask instead about the posture of your heart, for it is there, in that unseen turning, that prayer becomes what it was always meant to be. Not an act performed, but a relationship lived, even in the stillness of the night.